Good afternoon. My name is Joe Bandel, and I am the last Rosicrucian. Uh, I haven't done a Gaia Ascension update for a while, and today's actually the 14th of November. Tomorrow's the full moon in November, which should be a very powerful day. But we've had ever since the election in the United States, we have had pretty much a nonstop power days, if you will. And I just thought, okay, I should probably address some of this stuff that's going on. But I'm trying to do it in a way that, how do I say this? Um, I just want to try to be objective as much as I can. And because of that, I'm going to maybe I'll share a little bit on what I pick up psychically about the energies, things like that. But the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about something in this book, The Fourth Turning by William Strauss and Neil Howe. Now, this book came out, let me make sure I get it right here, 1997. And it was a book that predicted what would be happening today. As a way, it's fascinating. Also, what it talks about is basically the generational cycles and how every approximately 80 years, it can be 80 to 100 years, but every 80 years, uh, it's four generational cycle. You go through generational cycles. And what happens is, and they're saying it's very predictable what happens. What happens is you have a golden age. And during the golden age, um, you have these brilliant individuals that kind of lead the pack forward. So society uh, has these great forward strides. And everybody's kind of excited about that. And then gradually, these forerunners, if you will, these people that are pushing the forward edge, they get restricted and blocked and thwarted because the rest of society needs to catch up, basically. So you're going to have the first 40 years is where you have these advancements, and then the last 40 years you have where basically the collective, the slow people, um, the common collective, the collective are trying to catch up, and that is a predict there's that it's a predictable pattern of how society evolves. And I'm going to just kind of I'm going to refer people to this book if you're really interested in that. But I'm just going to make a few statements about it. Basically, they're saying that the golden age for the United States happened after World War One, after World War Two. The last golden age happened after World War Two, when the baby boomers were born, And the baby boomers were born because it was there was so much opportunity. And the general consensus, even though each generation has its task or it has its environment, a lot of it has a role to fill, but these roles are very predictable according to the fourth turning, which makes it fascinating to read. I'm a baby boomer, and so it's fascinating to find out the role that the baby boomers play during the fourth turning. But what's the fourth turning? Well, what basically happens is after that golden age, after that first generation, each generation after that, life is more difficult and more difficult and more difficult to the point where an entire generation just can't do it anymore. There's a crisis. The social contract is broken, and it does not work for the average person in the street. To put it in blunt terms, the American dream doesn't work anymore. Everything's too screwed up. So what needs to happen is a crisis needs to happen, and a new social contract needs to be drawn up that is fair for the majority, so that the majority of the Americans or the majority of the population have a reason to be alive and to be happy about being alive. That's kind of how it goes. And so there's a crisis, but before that can happen, a crisis has to be reached where there's just a total impasse, total gridlock and crisis that can lead to violence, which often leads to wars. And it gives the example in the book of the previous cycles where the crisis happened and the golden age happened. And for the United States, it was the last one going back was World War II. And the last one before that was the Civil War. And the last one before that was the Revolutionary War, where the War of Independence in the United States. So that's the cycle that they're talking about. And they're talking about the role that each generation plays during these different stages of happening. So it's very fascinating. But so basically, we find ourselves in a period of crisis. There's violence or the threat of violence. One of the things it could be a pandemic, the book talks about as a possibility, but also war is a possibility. And more interesting, I'm going to just say two things. One of them is that the solution, the new social contract, if it fits in the proper time sequence, the proper time sequence is that in 2025, we should have a new social contract being put in place, one that is good for just about everybody. You're always going to find a small group that's not going to like it, but something that works for 95% of the people, that works across the board. And that's going to be put in place according to a lot of resistance. Okay, so 2025, the new social contract trying to be put into place. That sounds very suspiciously like what we're seeing now. Just saying. And one of the things that it brings up is that this gridlock or this opposition within the society, within the civilization or the culture, uh, is so strong that there's no compromise, and you pretty much got to just wipe it out, wipe it away. Okay, so we just had an election, uh, which Donald Trump won, and he is he's assembling a team. He's putting a team together to kind of do uh, put forward the plan, if you will, or the social contract that he believes and that the majority of the American population is excited for or voted for, that they're trying to implement. For whether you agree with it or not, I'm just trying to say that that's what's seeming to happen. The other thing that this book mentions, which I found very interesting, is that it says it is the millennials that are going to buck up and make the changes that are necessary and needed. And it's going to be a kind of a tough time for everybody, including the millennials. It kind of says the millennial, it made a point about the millennials, and it said they don't like themselves, so they make it hard on themselves as well as making it hard on everybody else. But it's basically the idea somebody's got to roll up their sleeves and they've got to clean out the barn. That's pretty much what we're talking about. If you can call that clean out the swamp, that is an apt fit as well. So I find it very interesting that Trump's main cabinet picks, or the main picks that he is putting in place, are millennials. They're in the early 40s, just about straight across the board. There's not really any old farts, thank God. And it's got to, because we need to get the younger generations in there, and anybody older than me shouldn't have any say in what's going on at this point, because it's got to be forward looking, forward moving. And so the point that I'm kind of getting at, even saying all this, is that while Donald Trump may be the next president, or the new president of the United States, it is the millennials that are going to come up with the solutions. And that he's maybe an inspiration to them, but that they're the ones that's going to do it. I just thought that that was kind of interesting. I thought it was a little bit insightful. And that the timing really is kind of interesting. Now, just take some thoughts about that. I actually I'm going to continue with this video. However, I totally am done with this topic and I want to go into something else, and I got to gather my thoughts together. So I am going to pause the video for a moment while I do that. Thank you. Okay, I'm going to try to continue on. I've been watching on the YouTube a lot of things about astrology and predictions for the coming year. Um, it seems like there are really some astrologically, uh, the month of December, January is very significant, uh, even like the tail end of November here, and that a lot is triggering in the United States. That's uh, kind of the impression that I get, which, duh, we have a lot on our plates right now going on. But I also was watching, it was a testimony before the House committee about UFOs. And it was the second time that there had been testimony brought before the House of Representatives concerning the UFOs and the reality of them, the reality of, like, is there a program? Are there secret programs? Do such things really exist? Yada, yada, yada. And something that came, I was watching it, and one of the things that came out was it does seem, according to, there was 4 witnesses that were speaking, and they had to be very careful of what they were saying, but you could infer that, number one, there were crashes that involved, I'm going to use the term UFOs because I don't know the what other term they were using, a kind of a weird term, the new term for UFOs. But there were crashes, there were bodies that were recovered that were non-human. There was technology that was far beyond what we have today in our government or any other government in the world. And that, number 4, there's a lot of what they call reverse engineering, where in studying this machinery and studying these things, we learn how they're built, we learn about them, and we make technological advances from them. And I'm going to be blunt, I'm going to be honest. I have experienced, I guess, what I would call entities in the astral or the etheric, and there's no doubt in my mind that these entities exist. Uh, but and that you can communicate with them. A lot of the channelers out there are in contact with some type of life forms or whatever. But I drew a line. I drew the line and I said, I don't think I believe that they exist, but I don't believe they're capable of, that they're in the physical world the way that we are. So maybe they're in a dimension that's very close to our dimension, maybe not. However, in listening to the testimony, I had to come face to face with the possibility that there are physical aliens that visit our world in physical craft, and there have been physical crashes, and physical bodies have been recovered from them that are not human. And I'm still trying to wrap my head around that because that's not an easy thing to for me to deal with. Even though I do accept the idea that they exist in a non-physical way, if you or in another dimension or a parallel dimension or whatever you want to call it that way. So that's been kind of something that I've had to kind of come to terms with and say, hey, yeah, I guess I have to. And there's something that I watched Joe Rogan. Joe Rogan did a podcast in which he interviewed Donald Trump for 3 hours. And I watched that podcast like millions of others watched it. But there was a time when Joe Rogan asked if UFOs were real, if aliens were real. I forget just exactly what he said, but that's essentially it. He flat out asked the president, "Are these things real? Are these aliens real?" And it was interesting because I was watching Donald Trump. I was watching his body language, and his body language was kind of uncomfortable. It, it was like squirmed a little bit or whatever. And then he said something very carefully, but he said something to the effect of, yeah, people have talked to me about that, but I don't really buy into that stuff myself. I'm just paraphrasing because that's kind of the way that I understand what's happening. However, it was just yesterday that Trump was invited to the White House with President Biden to kind of talk about a transition, to have a smooth transition. And it was coincidence that, well, there's no such thing as coincidence, but this testimony in front of the House of Representatives happened on the same day. And I was like, wow, okay, this is kind of interesting or whatever. However, several channelers that I've seen on the internet that, oh, how do I say this? I will listen to a message and be open to it, but not necessarily believe it completely. There's too many people out there that are picking up on that within 3 years. I'm just going to use the term 3 years. Within 3 years, there's going to be first contact with aliens. And if I had to bring up a topic, or I had to say something that is coming into awareness, this is the message that I'm getting: is that before the end of the Trump presidency, which will be 4 years from now, a little over 4 years from now, it seems to me very, very likely that we are going to have so-called first contact with alien species, non-human intelligent life forms. Uh, Made public and disclosure. One of the terms is disclosure in the whole New Age community, and it will probably be triggered as a last ditch fear motivation by the powers that were to get everybody afraid of an alien invasion instead of a peaceful coexistence type of thing. But it will probably force the hands or whatever, force everything to come out in the open. That's kind of the point of my video tonight is, okay, I'm kind of putting some stuff out here, and this is what I'm reading. This is the sense that I get of things is that uh, we are at that point in the fourth turning. One side is won. There is a new social contract that is going to be put into place, and it's not going to have any mercy for the other side. Basically, it's like this is the social contract. We're putting it in. The other side might still hang around, but they're not going to be in any position of significant power for probably 30 years. But one of the last ditch efforts that they're going to have to stir things up is going to be the introduction in a fear based way of contact with aliens, non human intelligent life forms. And that the good side, if you will, the the good aliens are going to be showing themselves in a similar way, which goes along with the concept of the veil becoming thinner and thinner, where uh, psychic abilities are coming up, psychic phenomenon. We become a little more telepathic, and we're being forced because of the constant bombardment of suggestion. We are evolving back into our intuitive psychic natures simply because we don't know what to believe anymore, and reality is getting so crazy that we have to intuit our way through it for survival. Anyway, those are just some thoughts that I've put together for this week. I hope you enjoy this. Consider supporting me on Patreon if you like this kind of stuff, because I can, uh, there's a lot that I'd like to share, but I want it to be meaningful. And I don't want it to be what everybody else is putting out. So you heard it here first. Thank you. Till next week.